You wake up a little stiffer than you did a few years ago. Something in your grip feels weaker. Your memory skips a name it used to hold with ease. You blame the number on your birthday. But what if the quietest fix has been sitting in your refrigerator this whole time? Here is the claim, and I mean it plainly. One boiled egg a day can quietly repair 9 things that start to go wrong in a body after 70. The muscle that fades, the memory that slips, the eyes that dim, the nerves that tingle. My grandmother knew this in her bones. She just never once called it medicine. Stay with me, because there is a recommendation written in 1961 that explains exactly why our whole generation was taught to fear the one cheap food that was keeping us upright. And here is the part that matters most. You already own everything you need to start tomorrow morning. No prescription, no subscription, no trip to any store. Let me take you back for a moment. I can still see my grandmother's kitchen. A small window fogged with steam. A dented aluminum pot she'd owned longer than she'd owned me. Every single morning she'd lower 1 egg into that water with a bent spoon, count under her breath, and then run it under the cold tap until she could hold it in her palm. She was born in 1909. She buried 2 husbands, worked until she was 78, and could thread a needle in dim light at 84. I thought that was luck. I spent most of my adult life thinking that was just luck. I was wrong. And it took me being wrong for a very long time before I went looking for what she actually knew. Because here's what happened to me. I hit my late 60s and I did what all of us are told to do. I got scared of eggs. I switched to the boxes and the powders. I bought the protein shakes with the names that sound like race cars. I spent, and I am not exaggerating, close to $60 a month on supplements that promised me my strength back. Muscle powder, a memory pill. Something for my eyes with a long Latin word on the label. Little bottles lined up on my counter like soldiers. And I still felt myself slipping. So let me start where the slipping starts, because this is the first silent problem, and almost nobody warned you about it in time. After the age of 60, the average person loses somewhere between 3 and 5% of their muscle mass every 10 years, and after 70, that loss speeds up. Doctors have a name for it now. They call it sarcopenia. It is the reason a strong man becomes a frail one. It is the reason a fall that would have bruised you at 50 can break a hip at 75, and why so many people never fully stand up again after that break. It is silent because it doesn't hurt. It just takes, quietly, a little every month. Here is what my generation understood without any of the fancy words. You cannot hold muscle without protein, and not just any protein. Your aging body needs a specific building block called leucine to switch muscle repair back on, and it needs enough of it in one sitting to cross a threshold. 1 egg gives you around 6 grams of complete protein and a generous dose of that exact trigger in a form your body absorbs almost completely. And that phrase, almost completely, is where it gets interesting. Back in 2011, researchers publishing in the Journal of Nutrition measured how much egg protein the human body can actually use. A raw egg, it turns out, is only about 51% digestible. But a cooked egg jumps to around 91%. Cooking the egg gently nearly doubles how much of that muscle-saving protein you keep. My grandmother didn't read that study. She just knew a boiled egg sat right and a raw one didn't. The old way and the lab agreed, decades apart. So I put down the muscle powder. I started with 1 boiled egg every morning. Within a couple of months, the jar lid that used to defeat me stopped defeating me. But protein was only the first thing she was quietly feeding herself. Because there is something else inside that yolk, something that doesn't touch your muscles at all. It goes straight for your mind. Let me ask you something. Have you started walking into a room and forgetting why? Reaching for a word that used to come instantly? We joke about it. We call it a senior moment. But underneath the joke is a real fear, and it deserves a real answer. Your brain runs on a messenger chemical called acetylcholine. It is the substance your nerves use to fire a memory, to recall a name, to keep your thinking sharp. And to make it, your body needs a raw material called choline. Here is the quiet crisis nobody talks about. The vast majority of older adults do not get nearly enough choline in a day. Most people have never even heard the word. In 1998, the Institute of Medicine, one of the most respected scientific bodies in the country, did something it rarely does. It formally recognized choline as an essential nutrient your body cannot make enough of on its own and set an official recommended intake. That was a landmark. And do you know what one of the single richest, cheapest sources of choline on Earth turned out to be? The egg yolk. One yolk delivers roughly 147 milligrams of choline, more than a quarter of everything you need in a day, from a food that costs less than $0.25. Now think about that yolk we were all told to throw away. Think about the years we scraped it into the trash and ate the sad white part and felt virtuous doing it. We were pouring our own memory down the drain and paying for the privilege. That is when I started to get suspicious, because this was too good and too cheap to have been forgotten by accident. Somebody, somewhere, benefited from us being afraid of the yellow part. I'll get to who. But first I need to show you your eyes, because this next one stopped me cold. The leading cause of vision loss in people over 65 has a name most folks don't learn until their eye doctor says it to them. Age-related macular degeneration. It is the slow blurring of the very center of your sight, the part you use to read a letter, to see a grandchild's face, to recognize the person walking toward you. It creeps in without pain. By the time you notice, it has usually been working for years. Your eye has a natural defense against it, a pair of pigments that gather in the back of the retina like a set of built-in sunglasses. They are called lutein and zeaxanthin. They filter the harsh blue light that damages your sight, and they mop up the wear and tear of aging. The trouble is, your body cannot manufacture them. You have to eat them. Now here is where everyone goes wrong. They hear lutein and they think spinach, kale, the green vegetables, and those do contain it, but your body struggles to pull lutein out of a leaf because it is locked up tight in plant fiber. Researchers at Tufts University and others studying this discovered something that would have made my grandmother nod knowingly. The lutein in an egg yolk is far more available to your body than the lutein in vegetables because it comes wrapped in the natural fat of the yolk, and lutein needs fat to travel into your bloodstream. One study feeding people just over one egg a day for several weeks saw their blood levels of lutein rise dramatically, and zeaxanthin along with it. A cheap egg beat an expensive salad, not because the salad was bad, but because the egg delivered what the salad couldn't unlock. I want you to sit with that. The $18 bottle of eye supplement on the pharmacy shelf, the one with the tiny gold soft gels, is trying to give you the exact thing already sitting in a carton in your kitchen in a form your body actually knows how to use. Now, I know what some of you are thinking right about now. You're thinking, this is fine for people with money, or a big kitchen, or somebody to cook for them. You're thinking, this isn't really for you, because you live alone, or your hands aren't what they were, or you can barely be bothered to cook for one. I want to stop right here and talk to you especially because this next part is built for exactly your situation and it costs nothing. You do not need a stovetop ritual. You do not need to stand and watch a pot. Here is the simplest method I have ever found, and it was passed to me by a woman in her 80s who lives in a single room with one small appliance. You take your eggs straight from the fridge. You put them in any pot, cover them with cold water by about an inch, and set them on the heat. The moment the water reaches a rolling boil, you turn the heat off completely, put the lid on, and walk away. You do nothing. You let them sit in that hot water for exactly 12 minutes for a firm yolk, or 9 minutes if you like the center a little soft, then cold water, and they're done. No watching, no timing the boil. No standing there. If you can boil water once, you can do this. And if even that feels like too much on a hard day, here is the trick the old folks used. Boil half a dozen at once on a Sunday, leave them in their shells. They keep perfectly in the refrigerator for a full week. 1 egg a day, already made, waiting for you, needing nothing but a peel. That is 7 days of muscle, memory, and eyesight prepared in 10 minutes for less than $2 total. You do not need money for this. You do not need help for this. That is the whole point. That was always the point. But let me keep going, because we're only at 3 of the 9, and the next cluster is the one that quietly steals your independence. Let me talk about your nerves. If you have ever felt a numbness in your feet, a tingling in your fingers, a strange burning at night, that can be the sign of a shortage of vitamin B12. And here is the cruel part about getting older. As we age, our stomachs produce less of the acid needed to pull B12 out of our food, so even people who eat well can slide into a shortage without knowing it. A B12 deficiency doesn't just cause tingling. Left long enough, it steals your balance, your memory, and your energy, and it is often mistaken for simple aging or even for dementia. 1 egg gives you a meaningful share of your daily B12 in a form your body readily takes. And it doesn't stop there. That same egg carries vitamin D, one of the very few foods that naturally does. And vitamin D is what lets your body actually use the calcium you eat to keep your bones from turning brittle. It carries selenium, a mineral your immune system leans on to fight off the infections that hit harder every year after 70. It carries a little iron and the nutrients that help fend off the quiet fatigue and anemia that make so many older folks feel like they've simply run out of gas. Count them with me. Muscle, memory, eyesight, nerves, bones, immunity, energy. That's 7 silent problems, all pushed back by one food that my grandmother lowered into a dented pot every morning without giving it a second thought. Now think about how long you've been trying to fix each of those problems, one bottle at a time, squinting at labels with Latin words, never quite sure if the numbers on your own lab report meant something you should worry about. That confusion is exactly what the Senior Health Clarity System was built to end. It's a 3-volume set, more than 550 pages, that teaches you to read the quiet warnings your body sends before they turn into a crisis, to finally understand your own creatinine and EGFR the way your doctor never had the 12 minutes to explain, and to close the nutritional gaps that steal muscle, memory, and balance after 70, all without expensive drugs or risky procedures. And here's something you can prove to yourself for free tonight. Go pull your last blood work out of the drawer, find your creatinine number, and just write it down. That single number you can now start tracking is the kind of quiet signal the books teach you to read. The fastest way to get the books is to scan the QR code right there on your screen, or go to the link in the description or the pinned comment. Your doctor gets 12 minutes. This gives you the other 23 hours and 48, and those hours are running whether you use them or not. But before you go looking, stay with me, because the 8th one surprised me most, and it's the one I'd been paying a specialist to fix. The 8th one surprised me most because it's the one I'd been paying a specialist to fix: sleep. The older I got, the worse I slept. Eggs contain an amino acid called tryptophan, the same building block your body uses to make the calming signals and the sleep hormone that help you drift off and stay down through the night. It is the same reason people have felt drowsy after a warm meal for as long as anyone can remember. I'm not going to tell you an egg is a sleeping pill, but I will tell you that a body properly fed the raw materials for its own rest tends to find that rest more easily, and mine did. And the 9th, frailty itself. Not any one system, but the whole slow collapse we watch happen to people we love, where the muscle and the balance and the energy and the bones all give way together until a strong person becomes a fragile one. Every single thing that egg delivers pushes back against that collapse at the same time. That is why the old people who ate simply and ate eggs so often stayed on their own 2 feet into their 90s. It was never one magic thing. It was one humble food doing 9 quiet jobs at once. So now we come to the question that had been burning in me the whole time I was researching this. If this food is this good, this cheap, and this proven, then how in the world did an entire generation of us come to fear it? How did we end up throwing away the yolk and buying the powder? Somebody had to have taught us to be afraid. So who was it? Let me take you to 1961. That year, a powerful and respected influence in American nutrition put its weight behind the idea that the cholesterol in our food and the fat that came with it was the great enemy of the heart. The reasoning leaned heavily on the work of a single dominant researcher named Ansel Keys, whose theory tied dietary cholesterol to heart disease and who became, for decades, the loudest voice in the room. The egg, with its cholesterol-rich yolk, was cast as the villain. Practically overnight, the most complete, affordable food a working family had ever known became the thing a responsible person was supposed to avoid, and so we obeyed. My whole generation obeyed. We were good, careful people who wanted to live long for our families, and we did what the experts told us. We put the eggs down. But here is what almost nobody was told, and it took decades for the truth to catch all the way up. For most people, the cholesterol you eat in food has only a small effect on the cholesterol in your blood, because your own liver makes the vast majority of it and simply adjusts its own production to compensate. The simple, frightening story we were sold turned out to be far more complicated than the headlines ever admitted. It took until the year 2015, more than half a century later, for the nation's official dietary guidelines to quietly do something extraordinary. They removed the long-standing recommended limit on dietary cholesterol. They stated, in careful government language, that cholesterol was no longer considered a nutrient of concern for overconsumption. Half a century of fear softly walked back in a paragraph most people never read. 54 years. Think about that. 54 years of a generation scraping yolks into the trash. 54 years of the muscle powders and the memory pills and the little gold soft gels rising up to fill the gap where a 20-cent egg used to sit. When we got scared of the cheap thing, we got sold the expensive things. That is how the forgetting paid for itself. Not one dramatic villain in a dark room, but a slow drift where the simple free knowledge faded and something with a price tag was always ready to take its place. And a giant study out of China, published around 2018 and following roughly 500,000 adults, added the final insult to that old fear. The people eating an egg a day, on average, showed a lower risk of heart disease and stroke than the people who rarely ate them. The very food we feared for our hearts was, for most people, sitting on the healthier side of the ledger the whole time. So I had my answer. We didn't lose this knowledge because it stopped being true. We lost it because being afraid of it was profitable, and because the fear wore the costume of good advice. But I promised you something at the very start. I promised you a secret. Not just the egg, but the method. The way the old ones actually got the most out of it, the detail that turns a good habit into the thing my grandmother had. And this is the part I want you to carry out of here today, because it is the part almost everyone gets wrong. Here it is. It is not only whether you eat the egg, it is how you cook it and when you eat it. Start with how. That bright yellow yolk holds the choline for your memory, the lutein for your eyes, the vitamin D for your bones, and the healthy fat that carries all of it into your body. When you cook an egg hard as a rock, boil it fiercely for 15 or 20 minutes until the yolk turns chalky and rings with green around the edge. you damage some of the very things you're eating it for. Heat and time slowly break down the fragile nutrients, and that green-gray ring is the visible sign that you cooked it too far. The old cooks knew a hard gray yolk was a spoiled yolk long before anyone could explain the chemistry. The sweet spot, the thing the careful old kitchens understood, is the just set yolk, firm enough to hold, but still deep gold and tender in the center, never crumbly, never gray. That is why my grandmother counted under her breath and ran that egg straight under the cold tap. She wasn't being fussy. She was stopping the cooking at the exact moment the egg was safe to eat, but the goodness inside was still intact. The cold water was not a habit. It was preservation. And here is the second half of the secret, the timing, and this is the piece that connects straight back to the very first problem I told you about. Remember the leucine, the trigger that switches your muscle repair back on? And remember that your aging body needs enough of it in a single sitting to cross a threshold? Your body is best at building and holding muscle in the earlier part of the day, and it responds most strongly when it gets a real dose of complete protein at the first meal, rather than a scrap of it here and there. That is precisely why the egg belonged to breakfast in every old household I ever knew. It wasn't tradition for tradition's sake. Morning protein was the whole engine of a long, strong day, and they had it right without ever needing the word. So the full method, the recovered one, is this. 1 egg, cooked gently, cooled fast, yolk still golden, eaten in the morning, not saved for the end of the day. That is the difference between simply eating an egg and doing what the people who stayed strong into their 90s actually did. It was never written in a modern brochure. It was written in the counting under a grandmother's breath, in the cold tap running, in a pot older than her grandchildren. It was kept alive in kitchens while it was being forgotten in headlines. And now it is back in your hands. I went and did it, by the way. I cleared the little soldiers off my counter. The muscle powder, the memory pill, the eye soft gels, the whole $60 a month parade. I replaced all of it with a carton of eggs that costs a few dollars and lasts most of the week. My grip came back. My sleep came back. The word I'm reaching for comes to me a little quicker than it did. I am not going to promise you it will cure everything, because I don't sell miracles and you're too wise to buy them. But I will tell you that the strongest, sharpest old people I ever knew were not the ones with the fullest medicine cabinets. They were the ones with the simplest breakfasts. Here is what you really recovered today, not a trick about eggs. You recovered the idea that the answer to growing older well was never something you had to buy back at a premium. It was something we already had, that we were talked out of, one careful headline at a time. You are the kind of person who trusts what actually works over what is merely sold. If you weren't, you'd have clicked away the second I told you the fix costs less than a quarter. You stayed because some part of you already suspected that the simple old way had something the expensive new way lost. That instinct of yours is right, and it is worth more than any label on any bottle. So let me ask you something, and I truly want your answer. Did your mother or your grandmother have a ritual with her eggs? The counting, the cold water, a certain spoon, a certain pot? I told you about mine. I want to hear about yours, because those small remembered details are exactly the knowledge we're trying to save here. Tell me down in the comments, and tell me where in the world you're watching from, because it lifts me every time to see how far this reaches. And if you felt something click today, if you felt a piece of what we used to know come back to you, then come stand with the rest of us who are quietly reclaiming this lost everyday wisdom, one forgotten method at a time. Because the next one I've been digging into is a plant that half of you already have growing near your back door, treated like a weed that our grandparents used to reach for before they ever reached for the pharmacy. You have probably pulled it up and thrown it away. I can't wait to show you what it was really for. 1 egg, 1 dented pot, one thing they never should have taught us to fear. Go make your breakfast tomorrow like your grandmother did, and take back what was always yours. Before you go, let me tell you where this goes next. This video gave you the overview, but inside the Wise Living Circle, I pick up right where we stopped. And if something doesn't sit right, you can ask me directly. And a real person, me, answers you myself. You won't be doing this alone. Just point your phone's camera at the code on screen, and you can cancel any time. I'm glad you're here. Now, here's something just as important. Even a healthy egg can quietly harm you if you eat it the wrong way. Let me show you the mistakes to avoid, starting right now.